Hey guys, Uncommon Ramen here. This TCG Tuesday, we are going over core keyword abilities. Last video, we talked about combat phase and we went into great detail about it. This week, we're going to look at keyword abilities. Specifically, when I say core keyword abilities, what I mean is keyword abilities that are going to get reprinted from set to set, probably forever. They are typically the ones that will only get reminder text in core sets, although the D&D core set seems to have done away with the reminder text. I'll show you a little bit about what that means in this video. But basically, things we're talking about are trample, reach, first strike, hexproof, flash, flying, death strike, double strike. Sorry, death touch, double strike, lifelink, haste, vigilance, protection, indestructible, and menace, as well as defender, since it's there. So before we go into that, I want to talk about Magic the Gathering's golden rule. And the golden rule is basically that if at any point in time a card contradicts the rules, you go with what the card says. Okay? So basically, everything that I'm saying is going to be followed up by a clause of unless otherwise stated. Okay? And that basically just means that if a card states otherwise, that card takes precedent. So we're going to jump into this really quick. First thing I want to show you is what reminder text looks... Or I'm sorry, not what reminder text looks like. What a core keyword ability is going to look like. And I'm going to differentiate it between something that's not a core keyword ability. So right here, we have a card. We have Underdark, Basilisk, and it has a core keyword ability, Death Touch. Usually in a core set like this one, it would be followed up by parentheses explaining what Death Touch is. But I guess they've decided to do away with that. I'm not really sure why. I think it confuses new players. And again, if you're trying to get new players to the Magic audience, reminder text is a savior. But anyway, this is what a core keyword ability is going to look like. It's just going to say something like Death Touch, or in this case, double strike, lifelink. Okay, so as opposed to something like this, where we have italicized text that says pack tactics followed by a dash, 9 times out of 10, if it has this italicized text like this, the dash, everything following it is explaining what that particular italicized text is. So in this case, pack tactics is this. Okay. These italicized text abilities are mostly for flavor because, as I mentioned before, there's always going to be a follow-up telling you what it is, and it's almost never, and I'm going to say pretty much never, in parentheses, because it's just a flavor thing. We just know that Null Hunters are into pack tactics. So when you see these things, don't fret, because it's all explained right here what pack tactics means. And this is different from reminder text, because reminder text will always be in parentheses, and it will always be following one of the typical core keyword abilities. So we're going to put that off to the side. We're going to talk about each of the keyword abilities. So we can just jump right in here. We have our first one, which is lifelink. Lifelink is pretty simple. It basically means every 1 damage that this creature does, you are going to gain that much life. So this is a 2/2 lifelink, which means that it's going to deal 2 damage in combat, which typically means you're going to gain 2 life from it. However, if you buff the creature, let's say it gets +3/+0, it deals 5 damage, you're going to gain 5 life. Every time you buff this, whether it is a temporary until end of turn buff or a permanent +1/+1 counters, you're going to continue to gain more life as it attacks or as it deals damage. And when I say deal damage, that also means via blocking as well. So if you have a life link and your opponent attacks you and you block with it, you're going to gain life because you just dealt damage. There are other fringe cases, but I'm just going to move on from that. Lifelink, for every 1 damage that the creature deals, you're going to gain that much life. We're going to skip Double Strike really quick because I want to actually talk about First Strike first. So let's do those back to back. So, First Strike. First Strike basically means that creatures with First Strike deal their combat damage before any other combat damage is assigned. And what that means basically is that if the creature that has First Strike deals enough combat damage to kill the creature that's blocking it, then that creature doesn't get a chance to assign combat damage because it never made it to the combat damage phase. So First Strike basically just means that it attacks first, and if it does manage to kill the thing when it attacks, then it's going to take no damage in return. First Strike is extremely deadly because it's almost always going to be followed by something with some pretty high power, but some pretty low toughness, because really honestly, they don't need a huge amount of toughness because they're going to deal their combat damage first. This one also says if you sacrifice an artifact, it gets +2/+0. So basically, it can make itself a 4/1 First Strike, which means it can take out anything with a toughness of 4 before it takes any damage at all, which means that it's 1 toughness. Kind of paltry, doesn't matter. So First Strike just means that it deals combat damage before any other combat damage is assigned. Next up, we have Double Strike. Double Strike is very similar to First Strike in the sense that this creature is actually going to deal combat damage during the First Strike combat damage phase and during the normal combat damage phase. So if it survives the First Strike combat damage phase, then it's going to move right into the normal combat damage phase and deal an additional whatever amount of damage that it deals. So in this particular case, it deals 1 damage. It's going to deal that 1 damage during First Strike damage phase, and then it's going to deal an additional 1 damage during the normal combat damage phase. So if it goes unblocked, it's going to deal 2 damage directly to the player. If you block it, in this case a 1/1, if you block it with something that has 1 toughness, then it's going to deal 1 damage to the creature that has 1 toughness, killing it, and then it's going to go into normal combat damage phase, at which point it's going to deal 1 damage to you directly as the player. So Double Strike just means that it's going to deal its damage twice, once during First Strike phase, once during damage phase. Next up, we have Haste. So Haste basically, every creature in Magic the Gathering, when it is put into play from your hand, well actually, now that I think about it, when it's put into play from anywhere, is affected by what is called Summoning Sickness, which basically means that it cannot do anything that requires any ability that says that you have to tap that creature in order to use that ability, or attack on the turn that it came out. Haste supersedes that. Haste basically says that it can use tap abilities and attack on the turn that it was put into play. So it just means that it's a very fast creature. In this case, it's a 1/1 Goblin for 1, which is pretty typical. Raging Goblin. There's the Knight from Eldraine that has that as well. Haste just says that it can attack the turn that it's put into play, and it can use any tap abilities that it has when it is put in play. Now, I want to clear up that if a card other than the card that you just put into play, so if I put Blink Dog into play this turn, and then I play a card that says, as an additional cost, tap another creature you control, you can tap the Blink Dog despite the fact that it has Summoning Sickness, because the Blink Dog isn't the one using a tap ability. It's being tapped via something else. So you can do that. Haste basically just, it can attack on the first turn and it can use tap abilities on the first turn. We're going to skip on over to Flash and Flying, but I'm going to explain Flying first, and then we'll go into Flash after that. Flying basically means that this creature cannot be blocked by any other creature except creatures with Flying. With exceptions, like I said, everything will have a clause that says unless otherwise stated. So in this case, if you attack with this Flying creature, this 2/1 Flying creature, your opponent has to use something that has Flying to block it, unless otherwise stated. So flying is just a way to get over normal ground defenses. Flash is basically a way to turn a permanent into an instant. So when I explained phases in a previous video, one of the things that I mentioned is that during your main phase 1 and your main phase 2, this is when you can play cards like artifacts, enchantments, creatures, sorceries. After your main phase 1 and your main phase 2, the only thing that you can cast is instants. Flash is the exception to that. Flash is an ability given to permanents that would normally only be able to be summoned during your main phase 1 or main phase 2 to allow them to be cast at any time during anybody's turn. So Flash makes permanents instants. That doesn't mean that once they've resolved, they go to the graveyard. It just makes them instant speed permanents. So this Manticore I can potentially play on my opponent's turn. Specifically, I could play it right in the middle of combat. So that's what Flash is. Hexproof. It was hard to find things with hexproof that were inside this core box, but hexproof is right here. And this set of parenthesis text, this is what reminder text is. So this is not only telling you what hexproof is right here, it's saying hexproof, but it's telling you what hexproof does right here. And hexproof basically makes it so that you cannot be the target, or whatever has hexproof cannot be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. It's important that you understand this is spells or abilities your opponents control, which means that you can still cast spells or abilities on said permanent that has hexproof. Your opponent cannot. And the reason that's important is because there is another keyword text that has kind of lost itself to time called Shroud. Shroud says that the permanent with it cannot be the target of spells or abilities, period. And that means it can't be targeted by your spells or abilities either. Which means that if you want to buff it, or you want to do enchant it, you want to do something to it, you cannot. Hexproof does not say that. Hexproof allows you to do that. It just means your opponents can't do that. So we're moving on. We're going to Vigilance. Vigilance basically says that the creature does not tap when attacking. So normally when you're attacking with a creature, we'll have this little Manticore in play. I'm going to indicate so by tapping the creature and saying I'm attacking with it. Okay. When you have a creature with Vigilance, you do not have to tap it to attack with it. So essentially, if I had this golem in play and I wanted to attack with it, I would just simply indicate that I was attacking with this golem and that it has Vigilance. So therefore, it does not tap when attacking. Vigilance is great because that means that it can attack and still be left open later on as a blocker. Trample. Trample basically says that any damage that this creature assigns that goes beyond the toughness of whatever creature is blocking it will be assigned directly to the opponent that is blocking. So let's say that I have, again, this little Manticore that is a 2/1, and I am using these Tiger Tribe Hunters, the 4/4, to attack with, and they block with their 2/1 Manticore. My 4/4 is going to deal 1 damage to the Manticore, killing it, and then the remaining 3 damage is going to spill over to the opponent. In typical combat, if I have a 4/4 and it doesn't have trample and my opponent blocks with a 1/1, then the opponent blocks the entirety of that 4/4's damage. So the 4 damage is dealt specifically to the 1/1, nothing happens. If it has trample, that stuff carries over. Next up we have Reach. Reach is the exception to flying. Originally when I talked about flying, I said that a creature with flying can only be blocked by another creature with flying, unless otherwise stated. In this case, the creature has Reach. A creature with Reach can block creatures with flying as though it had flying. So essentially, to despite the fact that this creature does not have flying, which means when it's attacking, it's still susceptible to the ground targets. It can block creatures with flying, so even if the person who's attacking you has flying and you have no flyers, because you have reach, you can block. Next up, we have Death Touch. Death Touch is pretty simple. No matter how much damage this creature deals to another creature, as long as it dealt 1 damage, the other creature dies. Does not matter how much toughness the other creature has. If you attack with this 1/2 and your opponent blocks with a 1/5, despite the fact that you only did 1 damage to its 5 toughness, because the creature has Death Touch, that 1/5 will die. So Death Touch, basically, if it does any damage at all, it will kill whatever it's dealing damage to. This is especially important if you have something with multiple power. So in this case, it only has 1 power, so it's only going to deal 1 damage. But if this creature right here, a 4/4, has Death Touch and is blocked by 2 or more creatures, you get to assign the damage however you want. And because it has Death Touch, each 1 damage that you assign is enough to kill whatever creature is blocking it. So if they block with 3 creatures in an attempt to kill it, let's say it's a 1/1, a 1/1, and a 1/3, typically a 4/4 being blocked like that will only kill the 2 1/1s. But in this case, because if it has Death Touch, it will actually kill all 3 of them, because you can assign 1 damage to each of the 1/1s and then 1 damage to the 1/3, and that 1 damage is enough to kill it because of Death Touch. So Death Touch just says no matter how much damage it deals, as long as it assigns at least 1 damage to a creature, that creature is going to die regardless of its toughness. Next up, we have Protection. Protection from Multicolored. Protection comes in a lot of different forms. It can say protection from black, it can say protection from blue, protection from red, protection from green, protection from multicolored, protection from angels, protection from instants, protection from players, protection from opponents, protection from everything. Protection is an all-encompassing whatever they decide to put on it, essentially. And what it means is that anything that falls inside that category, so if it has protection from red, red permanents and red spells cannot target it at all, but it goes further than that. If a creature has protection from red and you have red creatures and it attacks, you cannot block it because it has protection from red. You cannot block something that has protection from red with red permanents. So not only can it not be targeted by red spells or abilities, but it cannot be blocked by red permanents, which means that if you're only playing red, you're kind of in a bad spot. Protection from multicolored is the same thing. Anything that has multiple colors in its casting cost cannot target it or block it. So protection. If it has protection from opponents, that means your opponent cannot block it, cannot target it, cannot do anything to it. Even though it's his creatures that are blocking, they still belong to him and therefore cannot block something that has protection from opponents. So protection is just an all-encompassing protection from whatever it states. Protection from angels means that it cannot be blocked by angels, targeted by angels, or hit by angel tribal spells. Next up, we have Indestructible. Indestructible says exactly what it sounds like. It cannot be destroyed. Anything that says destroy, anything that says that deals damage, anything that would potentially destroy this creature does not happen. And that includes dealing more than 5 damage and toughness. That includes blanket destruction spells that say destroy all creatures. That includes single target destruction spells that say destroy target creature. This has its limits, however. If a card says exile, that is not destroying, so therefore you can exile creatures that have Indestructible. If a card gives -1/-1 counters, that is not destroying or dealing damage to it. So if you do happen to give this a number of -- equal to 5 of its toughness, it goes down to 0 toughness and no longer has any toughness and therefore dies. So minus counters and Exile are your only answers to Indestructible. We also have Menace. Menace is pretty simple. A creature with Menace cannot be blocked by a single creature. It has to be blocked by 2 or more creatures. Normally when something has Menace, it also has some other really horrible keyword ability like, I don't know, Death Touch or First Strike or Double Strike or something like that. Usually it's followed up by something horrible. In this case, this just has Menace, which just means that it cannot be blocked by by less than 2 creatures. You have to block it with 2 or more creatures in order to block it at all. Which means that if you only have 1 creature on the table, this guy is going to swing for free. There are some other abilities. Defender. Defender means that it cannot attack. Anything with Defender cannot attack. Typically, you will only ever see that on walls. All walls have Defender. Well, most walls have Defender. And usually the creature doesn't have a lot of power, or any at all. That's not always the case. Sometimes things have Defender with substantial power and that aren't walls. But what you should know is that if it has Defender, it cannot attack. Last one I want to show you, and an example of reminder text. Right here you can see it says whenever this creature becomes the target of spell or ability an opponent controls, counter it unless that player pays 3 colorless. So this set of parentheses and the text there is what is considered reminder text. And it will always be, well, not always, but in this case is following up a keyword ability. This keyword ability, Ward, was actually something from Strixhaven, and since it has carried over into Forgotten Realms, I'm assuming that they're going to make that a core keyword ability. And since it's relatively new, it makes sense that they're going to continue having reminder text for it for a little bit. But basically, Ward is exactly what it says right here. Whenever it is the target of a spell or an ability, that spell or ability is not going to have an effect unless the opponent pays 3 more mana to allow it to do so. So that is what keyword abilities are. Now, when I say core keyword abilities, I know I mentioned this at the beginning of the game, I'm mostly talking about abilities that are going to get reprinted throughout every set. It's not just set-specific things. There are set-specific keyword abilities. Mutate from Ikoria is a good example of a set-specific keyword ability. It is also an example of an ability that will probably not get reprinted, or at least not for a while, in any recent coming up sets. Metalcraft was another example. Affinity for artifacts is another example. I'm trying to think, what was it? Not poison. Was it poison? Infect, which was in Mirrodin Besieged, but was also something that in a mechanic way back in the Dark and possibly Arabian Nights, where you put poison counters on your opponent, is another example of a keyword ability that will likely never come back, although I don't want to say that that's true or not. Wizards does weird things. But just keep in mind, when I say core keyword, I'm talking about the ones that are always going to continuously get reprint over and over again in multiple sets, regardless of what the set is, and typically only ever has reminder text in core sets, although it looks like that is being ditched as we go further and further into the age of Magic, where they decided that these abilities have been reprinted so many times that people should just know what they do, which I disagree with. I think that's it. Yeah, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them below, especially if it has anything to do with the keyword abilities or anything you need me to clear up. Just let me know down below. Negative comments are just going to get removed, just straight up. There's no room for it. This is for beginners. If you are not a beginner, then it's really probably not worth your time watching this because you already know all the information you're about to hear. I always like hearing from all of you as well, so feel free if you just want to pop in and say hi. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. And I am setting up a Patreon. I know it's taking forever, and I've said this like several videos. The Patreon is pretty much set up. I will likely link it in the description below. If you feel inclined to support me, to help me bring more of this content to you, just feel free to stop in. I appreciate anybody who feels the inclination to do so. And I think that's it, folks. Until next time. Peace.